I am a meteorologist. In my mind, that means I study math and science and talk about weather. In your mind, it probably means I get paid to lie. Yes, I know, I've heard all the jokes about how the weatherman is only right 50% of the time, and yet he still gets to keep his job. But let me remind you that every batter in Major League Baseball, they have a worse average than the weatherman. They get to keep their jobs, and they get paid a whole lot more money. I like to say that if you think the weatherman is always wrong, maybe you just need to start listening to the weather woman instead. Just kidding. Not really. So my meteorology career actually began by accident. Now, when I left my career nearly 30 years later, it was not an accident. When the world around us was changing in 2020, I made a change of my own and forecast a new life for myself. Now, I could have just comfortably pushed toward retirement, but I'd also have to hope and pray that I could continue working to the age of 65 as a woman in TV news. And if you haven't noticed, that is pretty rare. You might say that our society is bonded to the idea that women have a shelf life in certain careers. I decided to leave before that may or may not have happened to me. Let me start at the beginning. I reinvented my career twice. And I mentioned already that the first time, it was a little bit of an accident. Unlike many of my colleagues, I did not have a tornado rip through my town when I was a kid and decide from that moment on that I'm going to be a meteorologist. I didn't build weather radios in my parents' basement. I actually went to college the first time to be a newspaper writer. But what I realized after working in news for about 3 years was I had made a huge mistake. I discovered that I really wasn't cut out for all the negativity and everything that went along with that job. So I set out to reinvent myself from a news reporter to a meteorologist. And that reinvention number one required me to return to college for my meteorology training. Now, I could have just reported the weather without any formal training. I mean, after all, there was a weatherman without a weather background named Dave Letterman, who had made quite a name for himself reporting on hailstones the size of canned hams on TV in Indiana. And perhaps you've heard of Willard Scott. He was working in New York for NBC on the Today Show. He was presenting weather with a degree in philosophy and religion. So I could have just followed in their footsteps. But as a woman, deep in my soul, I knew I needed to do the work if I wanted to be taken seriously. After all, I was raised by a working mom and a dad who was a former Marine and Vietnam vet. And there was no way that I was going to be an uneducated woman in a science field dominated by men and be called a weather girl for the rest of my career. So going back to college was really the only option in my mind. Now, I didn't realize that at the time that going back to school was really my first reinvention, but I tell you what, all those lessons learned came in really handy nearly 30 years later when I left my job for my second reinvention. And that's the best thing about reinvention. It doesn't have an expiration date. You can reinvent yourself at any age. You can reinvent yourself when you're 22 and fresh out of college, or you can reinvent yourself on the cusp of 50 in the middle of your career. You can even reinvent yourself after you've retired. And you can reinvent yourself multiple times throughout your life. Don't let our ageist society hold you captive. Break that bond. You can make a decision to reinvent you. Now, I recognize that not everyone gets a choice about leaving their job like I did. I was able to choose, but sometimes you're not given that opportunity. Perhaps you've been fired, furloughed, maybe given a hiatus due to an unforeseen global pandemic. Maybe you've been downsized thanks to artificial intelligence taking your job. I mean, I actually assumed that would be me. I figured I would be like so many other women in TV news, and eventually I'd be pushed out of my job. I mean, after all, how many 60-year-old women do you see anchoring a local newscast or working as a chief meteorologist? Not very many. Now, how many 60-year-old men do you see? I've lost count too. And listen, this is not a slam on men, not at all. This is a slam on the industry, and not just the TV industry. This is our society as a whole that values experience and longevity, even gray hair and wrinkles in men, but despises those same things in women. Now, when I left my job, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And my decision to leave was not made quickly or easily. In fact, looking back, I would say it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made. I mean, I thought I was in my prime, but I wasn't sure if everybody else would think I was too old for something new. And I kept trying to figure out why it seemed like it was so easy for other people to walk away from their careers, but I was having such a tough time. A lot of times I did feel trapped, and I kept telling myself, but this is the only thing I know how to do. This is the only thing I've ever done. It was like this self-imposed prison holding me captive. And I tell you what, I was filled with the yes buts. Ever heard of a yes but? It's this conversation that we all have with ourselves once in a while. Yes, she quit her job to follow her passion to paint, but she could because she doesn't have any kids to support. Yes, they sold their house and bought an RV, and now they're traveling around the country, but they could because their parents left them a huge inheritance. That yes but conversation will always convince you that others deserve what you do not. Don't let a yes but hold you captive. Don't let it rob you of an opportunity. I think most people were so shocked when I walked away from my career because they were really focused on what I was giving up, and my focus was on what I was gaining. I gave up working 10 and 12-hour workdays and 50, 60-hour work weeks to gain more time with my family. I gave up working weekends and holidays and every time there was a tornado warning to gain the freedom of choosing my own schedule. I gave up waking up at 2 a.m. and living in a constant state of exhaustion to gain a chance to sleep when the human body is meant to sleep. I gave up dressing for bosses and consultants and viewers to gain the opportunity to dress in a way that makes me happy. So what about you? Have you given up a piece of yourself for something other than what you choose? And listen, this isn't even just about jobs and work. If you look up the definition of reinvention, it's really the process or action by which something, anything, is changed so much that it appears to be entirely new. So, going from single woman to mom is a reinvention. Going from family to empty nester is a reinvention. How about married to divorcee or widow? Sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes we're forced to reinvent ourselves rather than choosing to reinvent ourselves. So whether you want to reinvent yourself or you have to reinvent yourself, how do you do it? How do you live your best life with passion and purpose while discovering your what's next and, of course, still be able to pay the bills? Here's a couple of tips, a couple of steps that might work for you. The first step for reinvention is doing the work. Ask yourself, what do I need to do? My work early on was going back to college for that additional training. So what work would you need to do? Maybe make some pros and cons lists. Maybe squirrel away some money for your budget. Maybe interview people who have done what you want to do. Research, read, listen. Arm yourself with the knowledge that you need to make an informed decision and choice. The second step for reinvention is giving yourself time. Are you a thinker or a planner? Give yourself the time you need to think and plan. Now, don't just think and plan for so long that you talk yourself out of that necessary reinvention. I thought about my decision a lot for a long time. This was not something that I just woke up one day on a whim and said, I think I'm going to quit my job today. The third step for reinvention is not letting fear hold you back. Are you scared of leaping into the unknown? I sure was. Scared to death. Fear is a strong, often paralyzing bond. But here's the thing about leaping. Sometimes, if you leap, that's what you need to force yourself to find what you're looking for. And after you've leapt once, you have more courage and more confidence to leap again. After I invented my career twice, now I have more confidence and courage to reinvent other areas of my life. So think about your life. Are there places where you have reinvented yourself and maybe you just hadn't even put a label on it? Have you gone from single to married and maybe even back to single again? Have you lost a significant amount of weight and created a whole new you? Have you moved to a new town surrounded by new people? When I wrote my children's books about weather, and more recently a book about my life, I reinvented myself as an author. Now I'm reinventing myself as a speaker. Thank you, TEDxEustis. Fourth and final step for reinvention is focusing on what you're gaining rather than what you're giving up. Ask yourself, what will I gain if I do this reinvention, if I change myself? Don't list all those things that you're going to be giving up. So do your research, make those lists, and allow yourself to live your dream, not the dream of others. Break the bond of a cloudy day or a thunderstorm. Pop open your umbrella and forge ahead into the rain. Step over the puddles and into that new career, that new opportunity, that new life that you have invented for yourself, living your dream. Reinvention is possible. Go make it happen for you today. Thank you.